So we've already covered the Sega Master System, the Commodore 64 and the awesome Commodore Amiga 500. You'd probably expect the SNES, the PlayStation or maybe even the Dreamcast next. But no, we're going back even further to the system that had all of us Commodore 64 owners looking over the fence at our mates thinking, God, I wish I had one of those. Yeah, it's the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Famicom if you grew up in Japan. I'm Ashton, and here at Popcorn Respawn, we don't just play the games, we pull them apart to see what makes them tick. If you really wanted to see what talented programmers could do with limited hardware, the NES is one of the best places to look. By the early 90s, the NES was already an aging machine, built around a Recca 2A03 processor running at just 1.79 MHz with only 2 KB of system RAM and hardware that was never designed for flashy visual effects. The picture processing unit could scroll a single tile background and display up to 64 sprites, but only 8 sprites could appear on any one scan line before flicker became unavoidable. There were no hardware scaling effects, no rotation, no transparency and no multiple background layers like you'd later get on the Super Nintendo. And yet, by the end of the console's life, the developers were producing games that looked generations ahead of the launch titles. They used clever raster effects, split-screen scrolling, custom mapper chips built into cartridges, and years of experience squeezing every last cycle out of the hardware. These games don't look like 16-bit games, and they were never going to be, but they're some of the finest examples of what was possible on Nintendo's little 8-bit console. These are the 15 NES games that pushed the hardware further than anyone thought possible. Before we jump into the games, just a quick note, this is not a definitive list. I'm not pretending to be a NES hardware guru. I grew up playing a lot of these games as a kid, but that was over 40 years ago, and the old grey cells aren't what they used to be. So I've done my research, looked into what the hardware could actually do, and picked the games that I think pushed the NES the hardest. These are my personal choices, so if you think I've missed any game that deserves a mention, let me know in the comments. Sunsoft had already proved they knew the NES inside out with the original Batman, but Return of the Joker somehow looks even better. Batman himself is one of the biggest and most detailed player sprites on the system, packed with smooth animation and plenty of shading. The backgrounds are full of colour and detail, giving the game a look that's closer to a late generation NES title than something released just a couple of years after the original. It's proof that clever artwork and solid programming could make Nintendo's aging hardware look far more capable than it really was. Released at the end of the NES's life, Kirby's Adventure is often considered one of the best looking games on the console. HAL Laboratory made brilliant use of Nintendo's MMC3 mapper, allowing for larger levels, smoother scrolling and more varied graphics. The famous rotating tower in Butter Building is created using clever raster scrolling effects, giving the illusion that the entire tower is turning in 3 dimensions. It's one of the NES's most memorable visual tricks. By the 6th game, Capcom knew exactly how to get the best out of the NES. The graphics are colourful, the animation is fluid, and every stage is packed with moving machinery, animated backgrounds, and impressive boss designs. Despite everything happening on screen, the game remains responsive throughout. It doesn't reinvent the hardware, but it shows just how polished developers had become after years of working with the same machine. Konami's Crisis Force is one of the finest shooters ever released on the Famicom. Fast, scrolling, enormous bosses and huge numbers of enemies fill the screen almost constantly. The game also makes excellent use of raster effects to create convincing parallax scrolling, giving stages a real sense of depth, despite the NES only supporting a single background layer. Combined with Konami's custom cartridge hardware, it's an incredible technical showcase. Metal Storm is famous for its gravity flipping gameplay, but it's also one of the most visually impressive platformers on the system. Irem used carefully timed raster effects to split the screen into different scrolling sections, creating convincing parallax backgrounds that the NES wasn't designed to produce. Combined with detailed artwork and silky smooth animation, it gives the game a surprisingly modern feel. Sunsoft's Gimmick is often praised for its soundtrack thanks to the Sunsoft 5B sound chip, but the gameplay deserves just as much credit. The bouncing star isn't simply an attack, it's driven by realistic momentum and interacts naturally with slopes, enemies and the environment. The level of physics simulation was extremely unusual on the NES and helped make Gimmick one of the most advanced platformers of its generation. Recca pushes the NES harder than almost any other shooter. Enemy waves arrive at blistering speed while bullets, explosions and power-ups constantly compete for screen space. The developers expertly manage the console's sprite limitations, using flickering where necessary to keep the action flowing. The result is one of the fastest and most demanding games ever released for Nintendo's 8-bit hardware, even if it does have a really weird name for a shoot 'em up. Konami once again demonstrates why it was one of the NES's best developers. Bucky O'Hare is packed with detailed sprites, colourful environments and incredibly smooth animation. The levels are varied, fast-paced and full of imaginative set pieces, while the controls remain responsive throughout. It's a perfect example of how years of experience could make an aging console feel fresh again. Little Samson is often mentioned whenever people discuss the best looking NES games, and for good reason. The animation is exceptional, the bosses are huge and every playable character feels completely different. Large enemies are built from multiple sprites working together, allowing the game to create monsters far bigger than the hardware could normally display as a single object. It's an outstanding achievement in both art and programming. Zen isn't talked about as much as some of the other games on this list, but it deserves more attention. Alongside its colourful platforming stages, it includes impressive isometric sections that convincingly create the illusion of depth using nothing more than carefully drawn graphics and smart level design. Pulling off multiple gameplay styles this smoothly on the NES is no small achievement. Natsumi squeezed every last drop from the NES with Shatterhand. The industrial environments are packed with detailed pixel art, smooth animation and excellent use of colour despite the console's limited palette. Explosions, destructible scenery and large enemies all combine to make the game feel far more advanced than many earlier action titles on the system. Beat-em-ups were always demanding on the NES thanks to the number of large sprites sharing the screen. Konami did an impressive job keeping the Manhattan Project running smoothly, even during the busiest fights. There is still some slowdown in heavier scenes, but compared with many other NES brawlers, the performance is remarkably solid. Add colourful graphics and excellent animation, and it's one of the console's best looking multiplayer games. Vice Project Doom refuses to stick to one genre. One minute you're playing a fast-paced action platformer, the next you're in a first-person shooting gallery or racing along a pseudo 3D highway. Switching between these completely different gameplay styles without feeling disjointed was a huge achievement for the hardware, and the stylish presentation ties everything together brilliantly. Released only in Japan, Gradius II showed what Konami's custom VRC4 mapper could bring to the Famicom. The game features huge bosses, detailed background and spectacular effects, particularly during the famous fire stage where animated flames fill the screen. Combined with smooth scrolling and excellent performance, it's one of the most technically accomplished shooters on the system. It's impossible to finish this list without including Super Mario Bros. 3. When it launched, it completely changed expectations of what the NES could do. Massive worlds, smooth scrolling, imaginative level design and a polished presentation made it feel years ahead of most other games on the system. Nintendo also made excellent use of the MMC3 mapper to support larger levels and advanced scrolling techniques, helping create one of the greatest 8-bit games ever made. So there you have it, 15 NES games that pushed Nintendo's little 8-bit console further than anyone thought possible. The NES may have had a tiny amount of RAM, strict sprite limits and hardware that was already showing its age by the early 90s, but in the hands of talented developers those limitations became challenges rather than roadblocks. Whether it was clever raster effects, custom mapper chips or simply incredible pixel art, these games proved that great programming could often achieve more than more powerful hardware. But what did you think? Remember, this was just my personal list, so if there is a game you think deserved a place on the list, let me know in the comments. I'm always interested to hear what you think I should have included. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to Popcorn Respawn if you're new, and why not check out the rest of my games that push the hardware to its limit series. I've already covered the Commodore 64, the Commodore Amiga and the Sega Master System. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, see ya!
Videos and I'm